Hello and welcome. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on something absolutely fundamental to business. We're going to talk about how companies figure out what to make, how much of it to make, and, how to do it all without going broke. We are diving deep into the world of output and cost.
But really, have you ever stopped to think about that? Whether it's a local Karoo biltong shop or a huge car factory down in Quebec, every single business has to answer this question. It's the central puzzle they have to solve, not just to make a profit, but to survive at all. All right, let's get into it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the why. What's a company's main goal? Then we'll look at the two different time frames they think in. After that, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of day-to-day production costs, then zoom way out to look at long-term strategy, and finally, we'll see what happens when a business gets really, really big.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute most important piece of this whole thing. What's the end game? What is driving every single choice a business makes?
And there it is, profit maximization. That's the North Star for basically any company out there. It doesn't matter if they're deciding to hire a new person, buy a new piece of equipment, or open a whole new location. The question underneath it all is always the same. Is this going to help us maximize our profit? Everything else we're about to talk about stems from this one powerful idea.
Right. So to make all these profit-chasing decisions, economists like to think in two totally separate time frames. And this isn't really about days or years. It's all about how much flexibility you have to change things. So on the one hand, you've got the short run. Think of this as your right now. Your factory size, your office lease, that stuff is fixed. You can't just snap your fingers and change it. But what you can change is, say, how many workers you have on a shift. Those are decisions you can easily reverse. Then, on the other hand, you have the long run. This is the big picture. Here, everything is up for grabs. You can build a brand new factory, you can totally change your technology. These are the huge strategic moves that, once you make them, are pretty hard to undo.
Okay, so let's zoom right into the short run, the daily grind of operations. And to make this feel a bit more real, let's invent a South African company. We'll call it Karoo Knitwear. They have a factory, and they make these amazing wool sweaters. Now, in the short run, the size of that factory is set in stone.
So to figure out how they're doing, the folks at Karoo Knitwear look at three key numbers. Total product, that's the easy one. How many sweaters did we make today? Simple. Then you have marginal product, and this one's super important. If I hire one more knitter, how many extra sweaters do we get? And finally, average product, which just tells them how productive each worker is on average.
Now this is where things get really, really interesting. At first, you hire a new worker, and boom, they add, say, 5 extra sweaters to the day's total. Great. You hire another, they add maybe 4. But eventually, you get to a point where you hire one more person and they only add 1 more sweater. Why? Well, the factory starts to feel cramped. People are waiting to use the knitting machines. They're getting in each other's way. The extra output from each new person, that marginal product, starts to shrink. This is a classic economic idea, the law of diminishing marginal returns.
And this has a huge impact on your costs. Just think about it. When your first new hire is making 5 extra sweaters, the labor cost for each of those sweaters is pretty low. But when that last person you hired only adds 1 single sweater, you're paying them a full day's wage for just that 1 sweater. So the cost of making just 1 more, the marginal cost, starts to shoot up.
And we can slice and dice Karoo Knitwear's costs even more. They have their fixed costs, right? The rent on the factory. That doesn't change if they make 10 sweaters or 100. If you spread that cost over every sweater, you get average fixed cost. Then you have variable costs, things like wool and wages, that do change with production. That gives you average variable cost. And when you put them both together, you get the big one, average total cost. In other words, the total cost for every single sweater.
Okay, let's shift gears. We're zooming out from the daily grind and jumping into the long run. Now, the managers at Karoo Knitwear aren't worried about today's production schedule. They're asking the big strategic questions. Should we build a bigger factory? Should we invest in more advanced knitting machines? They're planning for the future.
Now this table might look a little intimidating, but the story it tells is actually pretty straightforward. Let's walk through it. Find the column that says Plant 1. Let's say that's a small factory with just 1 knitting machine. As you go down that column, you see that as we add workers, 1, 2, 3, our total sweater output goes up. Right, makes sense. But now let's see what happens in a bigger factory. Find the row for 3 workers. Now look across. In Plant 1, those 3 workers make 13 sweaters. But if you give those same 3 workers more machines in Plant 4, suddenly they're making 24 sweaters. This is the heart of long-run planning. Investing in more capital can make your whole team way more productive. Okay, So let's turn that data into a picture. This graph shows the cost story for that small, one-machine factory. And you'll notice it has this distinct U shape. Here's why. On the far left, if they only make a couple of sweaters, the cost per sweater is really high because they're paying rent on a nearly empty factory. On the far right, if they try to make too many, the place gets crowded, those diminishing returns we talked about kick in, and the cost per sweater goes up again. The goal is to hit that sweet spot, right at the bottom of the U, where you're producing at your most efficient level for that factory size.
So now, let's add the cost curve for a medium-sized factory, Plant 2. And this right here, this is the aha moment of long-run planning. If Karu Knitwear only wants to make, say, 10 sweaters a day, the smaller factory is actually cheaper. But look what happens if they think they can sell 15 sweaters a day. Suddenly, the medium factory's cost curve is below the small ones. It's actually cheaper per sweater to build a bigger factory if you plan on producing more. This is the huge strategic choice firms have to make.
And we can see it again with an even larger plant. The key thing to get here is that in the long run, the company isn't stuck on just one of these U-shaped curves. They get to choose their factory size, and in doing so, they get to choose which cost curve they want to operate on to be as efficient as possible.
So this brings us to our final and maybe most powerful idea that ties all of these long-run choices together. What happens as a firm just keeps on growing?
Well, it's a concept called economies of scale, and this is kind of the magic of getting bigger. As the firm grows, it can often make things for a lower cost per unit. Why? Well, it can afford specialized machinery. Workers can become true experts at one tiny part of the process, and they can buy their raw materials, like all that wool for the sweaters, in massive bulk, getting a big discount. Sometimes, bigger really is cheaper.
So how do all those individual U-shaped curves we saw fit together? They create this, the long-run average cost curve, or LRAC. You can almost think of it as an envelope that just touches the lowest point of every possible factory size. What this curve shows the company is the absolute cheapest possible way to produce any given number of sweaters, assuming they pick the perfect sized factory for the job. It's like their ultimate roadmap for growth.
And this one curve tells the entire life story of a growing firm. On the left side, as the company gets bigger, its average costs are falling. That's the magic of economies of scale. Then it hits that sweet spot at the bottom, the minimum efficient scale, which is the most efficient size it can be. But you have to be careful. If the firm keeps growing past that point, the curve starts to slope up. This is diseconomies of scale. The company gets too big, it becomes a giant bureaucracy, communication breaks down, and the cost per sweater actually starts to go up. So bigger isn't always better.
So, next time you're out and about, maybe at your local coffee shop or walking through a giant supermarket, think about this. Are they getting a great deal on coffee beans because they're buying in bulk? That's economies of scale. Or do you see signs of a massive company that's gotten too big, too complicated, maybe a little inefficient? That's diseconomies of scale. Once you know what to look for, you'll see the secrets of production are all around you.